Welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author is Father Christopher Collins, S.J., and the book is 3 Moments of the Day, Praying with the Heart of Jesus. It's published by Ave Maria Press, and the Apostleship of Prayer.org is what you're involved with.
That's right.
Great to have you here. You were on a while back with Father Mitch, and we've had Father James Kubicki here before, and let's just talk about first, what's the Apostleship of Prayer? I know it's tied into the Sacred Heart, right?
Right. It is tied into the Sacred Heart, and that more modern devotion, starting in the 17th century with St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, but her spiritual director was Father Claude Colombier, and so through that relationship,
so that's the Jesuit
devotion to the
there.
Sacred Heart kind of spread throughout the world. But then you jump forward to the 19th century, and then that's when the Apostleship of Prayer was started in France within the Jesuits, as a way of basically teaching people how to pray in daily life. And so the spirituality of the morning offering, and finding God in all things, in the small things during the day, and so on. And then pretty soon thereafter, the Pope asked that this was a great network of prayer that got started around the world, really, and he asked these members, the apostles of prayer throughout the world, to pray for his intentions every month, and so that continues up to today when the Pope annually,
which we have on EWTN.
Yeah, the Pope asked, he distributes those basically through the Apostleship of Prayer.
Was it even more of an imperative now that the Pope's a Jesuit?
We really listen now.
Right. You're really paying attention here.
That's right.
Now, this is the second book you've written. Was this something that you just decided on your own you think you needed, or did Father Kubicki said, hey, we need a book to put out there to promote the apostleship? What was the genesis?
Yeah, well, the genesis is he was my formation director early on when I had joined the Jesuits, so he was a great mentor for me, and then he later on went on to take over the Apostleship of Prayer, and so I was learning while I was a young Jesuit along with other younger Jesuits, what is this anyway? We know it's a part of our history, but it's kind of tapered off a lot, and so he would host these summer gatherings of younger Jesuits.
So you didn't join the Jesuits because you had this great devotion to the Sacred Heart?
No, not at all. No, that came later on. Really, early on though, when I was a novice, there was a couple of different reasons.
Yeah, you talk about it in the book about where you came to that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now in the foreword, Father Kubicki wrote, and he opens up talking about Dr. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist, and he said, the most basic human need is for meaning. Is that what you found as well?
I think so. I think that's what we're always striving for and struggling with, and so on.
So what does the devotion to the Sacred Heart have to do with meaning?
It's a way to look at the person of Jesus. We find our true selves. We know who God is by looking at Jesus, and we know who our true selves can be by looking at the person of Jesus.
I was going to ask you, because we talk about our true selves. Is that who we want to be, who we are today, but strive to be more?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think what we're made for, really, and we struggle along the way. But then specifically, not just looking at the person of Jesus, but that vision of his heart that is pierced and bloodied, but also on fire. And then him, a lot of times those different versions of him. He's pointing his heart, saying, "This is it," and then he's beckoning to us, saying, "This is the way I live. This is the way I love, and this is for you too." And you don't have to do it,
right.
But it's not going to work if you don't.
I'm showing you the way.
This is the fullness of life.
And, Now, Father also says in the foreword here, he talks about us living in a throwaway culture, and also what the Pope has called that, which rejects as worthless those who are not productive and successful. The idea that there's some life not worthy of life is disturbingly similar to Nazi ideology. In fact, that's what they actually said that.
Right.
How does the Sacred Heart or devotion to the Sacred Heart help us in combating, which clearly I think we all agree we live in a throwaway culture where if you don't have some utility, people wonder whether you should bother hanging around.
Right, yeah. Big movement of that up in Canada right now. We just had Cardinal Collins come and Archbishop of Toronto talk at St. Louis University where I work about this massive movement for euthanasia. This is
exactly.
The ultimate kind of throwaway culture. But with respect to the Sacred Heart devotion, a lot of this is really grounded, especially in that line of first chapter of Colossians, where St. Paul is saying to the church there, regular people like us, the church, we make up for what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. And when I first read that, I thought that's got to be a typo. What's lacking in the suffering of Christ? Right? He accomplishes salvation by the cross and his sacrifice on the cross, and that's true. That's what we believe. But it's also the case that the Lord is relying on us. He's waiting for us to participate. I think it's all about participation in His saving work on the cross, and of course, his suffering and death looks like defeat, looks like failure. He's a castaway at that point, right?
The sign of contradiction.
Right,
really.
and it's for us, those moments when we are experiencing that, those betrayals, the rejections, the powerlessness, all these sorts of things, in light of the mystery of Christ and the salvation that he accomplishes on the cross, we can participate in that, and therefore we can be a part of the salvation of the world, really.
Okay.
And so that gives those moments of darkness and hopelessness to us a way of being transformed to say, I'm actually, if I'm offering this, if I'm uniting myself to the person of Christ in his apparent defeat on the cross, I can be a part of the salvation.
Right, give some
the
meaning
mystery
to your suffering.
Yeah,
as
the
it
ultimate
is.
meaning, really.
Right.
You know?
Now, here's the question: it talks about here in the beginning about giving ourselves fully to God. And he said, is it possible in our busy, flawed lives to give ourselves fully to God? Can we do it even for a day? And his answer is yes. And he says, think about the Eucharist. What did he mean?
Yeah, so and that's part of the way that prayer of the morning offering goes.
Right.
We, on a personal level, we say, Lord, I want to try to unite my heart to yours today. Whether I'm successful or failing, whether there's joy or sorrow, I want to try to unite myself to you, just as you perfectly make that sacrifice of yourself that's offered in the Mass. So the Mass itself is the perfection of that sacrifice, and it also gives us a paradigm for how to think about our daily lives, right? So in very ordinary ways outside the liturgy is the paradigm for it. So what if I'm, let's say, at the offertory, if I'm considering also, as those gifts come up the aisle, they're pretty meager, right? There's not much in those beautiful vessels that are carried up, a little bit of bread, a little bit of wine. It doesn't look like much, but they're offered, right? And watch what happens when that offering is made, right? And so we are, and it's important that that offertory comes from the people, right? That's the way it's set up within the liturgy. That's the gesture of it. It's got to come from the people. There doesn't look like much. It almost looks like it's not worth offering.
Right.
But do it and watch what happens.
Is that in the same way he means we begin each day by accepting that day as a gift from God and offering it back to him?
Right.
Because in a sense, we're giving back what we've been given.
Exactly. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the constant kind of dynamic, and we remind ourselves of that at the very beginning of every day when we make this prayer. Okay, you've given everything to me, so now, Lord, I want to try to offer it all to you. I want to have my heart opened up to the world. I don't want to get closed off to the world in discouragement or cynicism or
And why is it 3 moments of the day that make life worthwhile? Why isn't it 1 or 5 or 7? Why is it 3?
Well, in this way of praying, especially if you think about the morning offering at the beginning of the day, and then as a kind of a bookmark, actually, at the end of the day.
Yes, I like that.
You like that? That just came to me. Thank you. At the end of the day, if you do a review of the day, and the examine is what St. Ignatius called it, remember what happened in the day, the particulars, the little things. So if you think about those two things together, you kind of make an ideal offering at the beginning, and then you do a kind of a realistic inventory of what actually happened during the day. And it's all in the particulars, right? And there are elements to be grateful for. There's elements to have regret for. But that was the offering, and it was imperfect in hindsight. But I gave it a shot, right? And I've got another chance tomorrow. And then if you think about the third moment, as it were, as being the Eucharist itself, and the Mass itself is the kind of foundational.
So does one have to go to
paradigm.
Mass every day to have the 3 moments?
No, but it's the reality of the Eucharist, and that we are living out all the time, and it's kind of reminding ourselves that this is the way things work within the Mass. Is the way things can work in my ordinary life outside the church, outside the liturgy, even if you think about it.
Now, you mentioned earlier, we were talking about you grew to become involved with the Sacred Heart. Right. What did Lakota teenage have to do with you coming to that understanding?
Yeah, first thing, when I was a novice, I joined the Jesuits 20 years ago, and we do all kinds of spiritual reading along the way. One book that I read was by a former general of the society, Father Arupe.
Who you mentioned in the book.
Right, and so I read this little letter of his that he wrote to the rest of the Jesuits around the world. It's the very last thing that he wrote because he had a stroke very soon after. And his last message to the Society of Jesus was, we've got to recover devotion to the Sacred Heart. This is 1981, so a lot of the devotional life had just kind of been stripped
kind of
away.
drifted there.
Right. So he said, okay, I understand why you felt uneasy with different elements of the way it was layered, and maybe it seemed too sentimental to you. I understand that. He said, but we've got to recover this devotion of the Sacred Heart because that's the centrality of our lives as Jesuits, and we've got to look for new ways to make that known to the world. So that just caught my attention. I didn't really know what he meant by devotion to the Sacred Heart because I didn't grow up with it. But I said, okay, something's important there, right?
Right.
But that was just reading. So then I went out as a novice. I was sent to, we have a 2-year novitiate. In the second year, I was sent to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, where we have a high school and 2 grade schools and a lot of small parishes, rural parishes. So I was teaching in the high school there, and I was all excited to do it, and I knew there were lots of difficulties. This is it's usually about the poorest county in the country. There's a huge amount of unemployment and poverty and alcoholism and drug abuse and violence and so on. There's the fabric of the culture that people have suffered a great deal, right? So I knew all that, kind of in the abstract, but then I'm concretely in it, and I'm trying to teach high school. And
which is tough enough anyway.
teach high school religion in that setting where there's a lot of resentment also about another white guy coming out to teach in this setting and so on. So there were lots of reasons why I hit barriers in the classroom. So I felt like I was being defeated every day in the classroom. But then I would come back at the end of the day into our little Jesuit community chapel, and I'd sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and I think I was mostly kind of just complaining to myself about the situation, or feeling sorry for myself, or being angry at the situation for a whole variety of reasons. But I was mostly kind of muttering to myself, I'd say. But just beyond the tabernacle was this little statue of the Sacred Heart that you see. It's out in the hallway. And it was as if for the first time I really started to look at it. For whatever reason, I really started to get drawn in as he's pointing, and his heart is bloodied.
Right, sure.
He's trying to offer that love to the world, and he's being rejected for it. I was kind of captured by that vision,
Right.
and I started to talk to him instead of talking to myself. Lord, what's it like for you to want to offer your love, the love of the Father, to the world, and to be rejected by it?
Right.
Yeah,
That's good.
and
Yeah,
so
good point.
that's the thing that kind of got my attention. But he's also on fire. That heart is also on fire. That's what I want. So, but somehow those go intimately linked.
Well, you
right?
say that the piercings and the fire of that heart had started to sink into my imagination. I began to see with the eyes of my own heart how the piercings and the fire go together. They're not contradictory. You go on to say, if I try to avoid piercing, I might be able to do that for a while, but then the fire will go out.
Right.
I can build up barriers around my heart to make sure I don't get disappointed or hurt.
Right, and I think we're constantly in that struggle on a daily basis. You know, we can get burned, we can get betrayed, we can be disappointed, we can have a failure, and we start to say, you know what, I'm not going to risk anymore.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Thomas. We just had Divine Mercy Sunday, and that reading of his being burnt. You know,
Right.
somehow I'm not going to believe Thomas. That defiance. You know, and then there's something mysterious about him encountering the wounds of Christ, that he lets his guard down and says, "My Lord and my God." He comes out of himself again in encountering that heart of Christ that's pierced. So,
And you talk about here, and it's a line that struck me. It says, "And if this is God, then who am I? What does it mean to live authentically?" And that's a question. We hear that word all the time, Bandit. Everything's going to be authentic. What does it mean to you when you say that?
when we look at the person of Jesus, that's who we are. That's our authentic selves. No matter who you are, when you're looking at him and in relationship with him, that's what it looks like to be human, right? And that's what, it comes out of, that's the fundamental sort of mystery of our Christian faith, is that when in the person of Christ, we both know who God is and who humanity is at the very same time, right?
Right.
So it's coming into relationship with him and living like he does, confident that the Father calls him his beloved Son. So that's where it all comes from, right? And because he knows that, because he gets that so intimately, and he's heard that from all eternity, that you're my beloved Son, he then can go out into the world and carry out this mission, and there are days of success and there are days of failure, looking from the outside, but he's pouring that love out no matter what. And I think that's our call too.
So you say as you start praying like this, little by little, you'll get in the habit of speaking to Jesus about all that is ordinary in your life. Then you begin to realize that by speaking about it to him, things are starting to change, or you're changing. Do you think, well, why do I need to tell the Lord these ordinary things? He knows this stuff already.
Yeah.
I mean,
right. Yeah. Right.
Why do I need to do that?
Yeah, that's a great deception that I think we can fall for by the evil spirit. To be honest, so there's something, even from the story of the fall of Adam and Eve at the very beginning in the garden. Everything's great. All they've got to do is just enjoy each other, receive everything that's in the garden. But then this little voice comes in and calls into question, did the Lord really say this? Now start thinking to yourself about what God is thinking or what he did say. So the communication's cut off, right? They're not sharing. They're not taking that stroll in the garden in the breezy time of day, and they start to kind of think to themselves, well, maybe he didn't say that. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to think about it again, and then that's where all the confusion starts to come in. And I think that plays out again. The Lord knows everything, but we have to keep communicating, right? When we start to talk to ourselves about things and think only to ourselves, we get
or you talk about the
messed up.
the third person versus the second person in the sense of
I think this
that conversation.
Yeah, this kind of dawned on me along the way that there's something about prayer. Just here's a fundamental for prayer. A lot of times I think maybe we think we're praying, but we're really just thinking about spiritual things, or we're thinking about God and what God maybe thinks about us or what he maybe wants us to do. But I'm not talking to the Lord. And so here I think this is a helpful kind of encouragement. When it comes to communicating with the Lord, speak to him as you, not thinking about him as him, right? So it's the second person, not the third person. You, not him. If it's only him and I'm just talking to myself then things get distorted at that point.
Right. Now the layout and the format of the book is set up so you've got at the end of a chapter an invitation, then you've got a daily offering prayer and questions and reflections. So was this your idea to put it together like this? Was this the publisher's? Did you see this as being like a study kind of thing that could be used in a parish?
Well, the publishers encouraged me in that direction. I was just trying to get kind of the substance of it out there, and then they said this could be a helpful way for either individuals or groups to kind of go through this and be asking themselves and praying with those reflection questions at the end. And so I thought that was a good
Did you
idea.
come up with the questions?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Now, as we move ahead here in part one, it says, if we want to get closer to God, we must speak with him frequently in prayer. Okay, fine, but how exactly do we do that? What if I don't feel up to the task? And then you say, actually, we aren't up to that task. What do you mean we're not up to the task?
We're not. We need the help of the Holy Spirit to pray within us sometimes,
So
all
in
the
a sense,
time.
we have to ask the Lord to help us for this communication
Right.
as well.
Yeah. And there are just so many, I think, forces that are active in our ordinary lives that just cause there's a great sense of inertia that we can get stuck in a variety of ways. We can like you were just saying before, we can get, especially when things get discouraging, we can say, well, the Lord, he knows everything. I'm tired of talking to him. It seems like he's not helping. So I'm just kind of gradually caving in on myself in a variety of ways. And it's simple, but it's hard to keep genuinely speaking from the heart to the Lord.
Or sometimes people
basis.
afraid to maybe bring it up or talk because they feel they're going to be disappointed because it won't be changed, or the answer they're expecting is not the one they get back.
Right. And I think that's where, a lot of times in our prayer, it's good to ask for things and ask for help, or we want things to go a certain way, so we ask God's help to make it turn out that way. But we're really asking the Lord to do things our way.
I've got a couple of suggestions I want to think about.
Right. In a more fundamental way, I think what I'm kind of trying to suggest is it's still good to be able to ask for the big things, but cultivate the relationship itself, right? Don't go to God like the bank.
Well,
like
say
I
here,
want to.
morning offer is not a laundry list of petitions,
Right.
but really what you're doing is saying, I offer you.
Right.
You're offering yourself, your day to the Lord.
Yeah.
It's what you're doing.
Right.
In a
Yeah.
sense, right?
Yeah. I want to try to, and then I'm going to have a different sort of relationship. Because it's really this is ultimately about a friendship with God, a friendship with Christ, a sharing, letting him be a part of my ordinary life, so that I'm not just going, sometimes I think we do sort of approach God more like the bank. I want to make a withdrawal whenever I get desperate.
I'm making a lot of deposits over the years, so
yeah, right.
I should be able to withdraw some.
But I like these discrete little, I just want this, as opposed to letting him walk with me every step of the way during the day. And he wants to be a part of my life, and maybe sometimes we feel like he doesn't want to bother with us too. There's another deception, I don't want to bother him with the little things that are going on. Well, that's a deception too from the enemy.
In the section for the salvation of the world, you say to find God in all things is perhaps the aspect of Ignatian spirituality best known today. And yet, as far as we know, St. Ignatius never actually used that particular phrase. Rather, he urged his fellow Jesuits to seek God in all things. What's the difference?
The seeking, it's the striving. That's essential to make the effort to look for.
Not just stumble across like
God.
you find God where you happen to be, but you're actually looking for
There's
God.
something about the striving of it that's. And what am I? Yeah, that's a good question for us on a daily. What am I really looking for, or what am I really paying attention to during the day? So often we can. It's very easy to focus on the defeats or the little offenses that are done to us, and all of our attention goes to that one negative thing during the day that has happened to us, either my own failure or somebody else treating me poorly. All of our attention goes to that, and then pretty soon, if that's all my attention going there, the whole world starts to look like that, like they're all against me or this sort of thing. But this way of praying, both at the morning offering, but then also the examen at the end of the day,
right,
is about there's a lot more going on during the day than I realize, right? And I think that prayer of the examen or
which
the
is
evening
a reflection
review,
back on what. But you also mentioned the fact that you don't leave reason out of this as well.
Right.
Why did you make that point?
I forget what the context of that was.
Well, you were just talking about the fact that I just had it here.
Oh, about as opposed to feelings or something?
Yeah, just
or
saying
the
that
affective
the
life?
morning offering, the simple daily act of hope and love, also demands the use of some reason when considering our daily living.
Yeah, it's good, because let's say the way things can get colored in the way we see the world, that is sometimes so dark, or everything is going down the tubes, or everybody's against me, or nobody loves me. But if I kind of if I take a little time to step back from what's going on, and especially through that examen at the end of the day, I can both affectively have a sense that there are more things going on than just those negative things, but also it gives me a chance to think clearly a little bit. If I can get a little space in my life, I can think clearly. Okay, that one thing has happened that has been painful, but that is one part of a big day that has happened. And also, I can think a little bit about the situation of other people.
Yeah, kind of put it in context.
And have perspective.
In that way.
But it's hard to kind of get to step back and get that clarity of vision.
Well, the part I really liked in the examined part was this: a decent nap can turn one bad day into two good ones. That was actually my favorite quote in that.
Me too.
Yeah,
an old Jesuit psychiatrist told me that one.
In that section. So that's 3 moments of the day. Now, this is your second book. We just wanted to mention, just before we go, you had also written this book, The Word Made Love, the Dialogical Theology of Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict the 16th. So you want to just mention what this book is about?
This was my dissertation, actually, when I was doing my doctorate at Boston College. So I actually, coming out of that experience on the reservation, as a pastor at that point, I went back as a priest 15 years later. And I talked about with my director how important the liturgy was. Nothing else seemed to work. All my other efforts at programs and initiatives, nothing worked, but the liturgy really worked. And it struck me.
Worked for you, or worked for the people you were working with?
It both.
Okay.
It just worked. Right? There was something real that happened. It was especially it's such a small congregation. It was so intimate. It was so obvious, and especially as a new priest, I'm paying attention in a new way to what's going on in the liturgy. And then my director said, "Why don't you write about that? The reality of the kind of dialogical reality of the liturgy, the relationship that's cultivated in encountering Christ in the liturgy." And he said, Joseph Ratzinger is the man in the West of theologians that can uncover that for you. So then that turned into a broader way. When I started to read more closely his theology, he talks about how it's really in the context of dialogue. Christianity is in a sense all about dialogue. I don't know who I am unless I'm talking to another. The Father is speaking to the Son. The Son.
We hear a
the Son
lot
is
of
being
that
heard
from
by
really
the Father.
the present Holy Father.
Right.
That whole encounter dialogue.
And whether you're talking about the Trinity, the speech and the listening and the relationship,
It's all
that is
relational.
the Trinity, that God speaks and the world comes about. In the context of the liturgy, where the Word of God is spoken to us and we're responding. So anyway, I try to uncover how that plays out in his thought all over the place.
Okay, that's The Word Made Love. Do you have any other books in the works, or
No,
you're happy to?
I'm just trying to catch up on
Got to
emails
keep
right
going.
now.
Everything else you got to get going. Well, thank you so much, Father.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
It's nice for you to stopping by Bookmark. Our guest author has been Father Christopher Collins, S.J. His work is 3 Moments of the Day, and it's definitely worth checking out. It's published by Ave Maria Press, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic. Join us next time right here on Bookmark.